Robert sat on his porch swing. It was almost dark. He held a cup of coffee. The coffee was cold. He did not drink it. He just held it in his hands. The swing did not move. It had not moved in a long time. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then stopped. Robert looked at the empty seat beside him. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked away. The porch light flickered. It always did that now. Robert did not fix it. He did not fix many things anymore. The swing creaked when the wind pushed it, just a little. Then it went still again. Robert closed his eyes. He listened to the quiet. That quiet had a weight to it, like a coat left on too long. Somewhere behind him, inside the house, a clock ticked. He did not go in to check the time. He already knew it was late. The coffee grew colder in his hands. The swing did not move. Sometimes, late at night, he would walk slowly through the rooms of the house, touching things without meaning to. The back of a chair, the edge of a bookshelf, the frame of a photograph on the hallway wall. He was not looking for anything in particular. He simply liked to feel that the house was still full of things that remembered her, even if he could not always remember why he was standing there. He was 71 years old. He had lived in this house for 40 years. He knew every sound it made. He knew which step creaked and which door stuck in summer. He knew which window rattled when a truck passed on the road, but some mornings he woke up and did not remember why he was still there. He would lie in bed and listen to the house breathe around him, and for a moment, just a moment, he would forget what year it was. Every morning, Robert woke up before the sun. He made 1 cup of coffee, not 2. He used to make 2. He poured the water slowly, the way he always had, and he watched the steam rise up in the cold kitchen air. Then, he walked to the small garden by the fence and watered 1 plant, a tomato plant. It grew slowly. He touched its leaves the way a person touches something fragile. He checked the soil with 2 fingers, the way Linda used to show him. Then, he walked to the mailbox at the end of the driveway. His steps were slow. His knees did not like the cold. The gravel crunched under his shoes, 1 slow step after another. Sometimes, on his way to the mailbox, he would stop and look back at the house. It looked smaller than he remembered it, though nothing about it had changed. The paint was the same pale yellow Linda had chosen years ago. The shutters were the same faded green. Only the man looking at it had changed, and even he was not entirely sure how. Most days, the mailbox was empty. Sometimes there was a bill, sometimes nothing. Robert opened it anyway, every day. He closed it slowly, like it might still hold something if he waited long enough. On his way back, he always paused by the old oak tree near the fence. Linda had planted it, many years ago, when it was no taller than his knee. Now it reached higher than the roof. He touched its bark sometimes, just for a second, the way a person touches an old friend's shoulder. His coffee cup had a small chip on the handle. Linda had bought it at a yard sale, $2, a long time ago. He never replaced it. He held the cup a certain way now, so his finger would not touch the chip. That is not easy to do after so many years. Sometimes he forgot, and the chip caught his skin. and for one small second, it almost felt like she was still there, reminding him to be careful. In the afternoons, Robert sometimes sat in the wooden chair by the front window. He watched the street. Cars passed slowly. Children rode bicycles home from school. A woman walked her small white dog past his fence every day at 4 o'clock, always at the same pace, always looking straight ahead. Robert did not know her name either. He knew the shape of her routine, the way he knew the shape of his own. He kept a small radio in the kitchen. He turned it on sometimes, just for the sound of another voice, even if it was only a man reading the weather. He did not always listen to the words. He just liked knowing the house was not completely silent. When the radio was off, the silence pressed in from every corner, thick as fog rolling off a field. Every morning, at exactly 7 o'clock, his neighbor Mark walked out to get his newspaper. Gray hair. A blue jacket he wore even when it was not cold. Mark always waved, one hand raised, a small smile. He walked with a steady, unhurried pace, like a man who was never in a rush to be anywhere else. Robert waved back, but his wave was smaller. Sometimes just 2 fingers lifted from the porch railing. He did not know Mark's last name. He did not know if Mark had children. They had lived next to each other for 6 years. They had never once sat down together. Robert sometimes wondered about him, in a quiet way, what his mornings were like, whether his house was as quiet as this one. At night, Robert sat on the porch swing, alone. The gate at the end of the yard had a squeak in its hinge. He heard it sometimes, in the wind, and for 1 second he thought someone was coming through it. No one ever was. He would sit there until the cold crept into his shoulders, and only then would he go inside, turning off one light at a time, room by room, until the house was dark and still around him. 2 years ago, the swing moved almost every evening. Linda sat on one side. Robert sat on the other. Between them, a small table. On the table, a glass of lemonade, sweet and cold, ice knocking softly against the glass. The sound of that ice was small, but Robert remembered it more clearly than almost anything else. A small, ordinary sound that had once meant everything was right in the world. Linda liked to talk about small things. The neighbor's new car. A bird that built its nest too close to the porch light. The way the sky turned orange before it turned dark. She would point things out to him, one after another, and Robert did not talk as much. He liked to listen. He liked the sound of her voice more than almost anything. Sometimes he would close his eyes just to hear her better, and she would laugh and ask if he had fallen asleep. One summer, they had a barbecue right there in the yard. Smoke rose from the grill. Neighbors came with folding chairs and bowls of potato salad. Someone brought a radio. Old music played low under all the talking. Linda wore a yellow dress that day. She laughed at something someone said and put her hand over her mouth, the way she always did when she laughed too loud. Robert stood by the grill most of the afternoon, turning the meat slowly, watching her move through the crowd of neighbors like sunlight moving across a room. There was a rainy afternoon, too. Rain came down hard on the roof. Linda made hot tea. They sat by the window and read from the same worn paperback, taking turns with the pages. Robert read slower than she did. She never once told him to hurry. Sometimes she would rest her head on his shoulder while he read, and he would slow down even more, just to make the moment last a little longer. And there was her birthday. Right there on the porch, Robert had hung small paper lanterns along the railing. Linda blew out 3 candles on a small cake. She looked at him across the flame and smiled, like she already had everything she would ever need. The swing moved gently that whole evening, back and forth, carrying their voices out into the warm dark. Later that night, after the guests had gone home, they sat together in the quiet, and Linda rested her hand on top of his, and neither of them said anything at all. They did not need to. There was one more Sunday Robert often remembered, an ordinary one. No party, no cake, just the two of them, sitting on the porch after church, sharing a plate of sliced peaches. Linda had hummed an old hymn under her breath, off and on the whole afternoon. Robert had not thought much of it at the time. It was just a Sunday. Now, looking back, he understood that some of the best days never announced themselves as anything special at all. One winter, years before, the power had gone out during a storm. They sat together at the kitchen table with 2 candles between them, eating cold sandwiches by candlelight because the stove would not work. Linda had laughed the whole time, saying it felt like a picnic indoors. Robert remembered thinking, even then, that he did not need anything more than that small circle of candlelight and her laughter to feel like the luckiest man alive. There was also the year Linda got sick with a bad flu, and Robert sat beside her bed for 3 days, bringing her tea and toast and reading to her from the newspaper just to fill the quiet. She had teased him afterward, saying he made a terrible nurse but a very patient one. He had not minded being teased. He had only been glad she was well enough to tease him again. Some nights, Robert could almost hear the ice in that lemonade glass. Some nights, he could almost smell her perfume, faint, like lilacs after rain. He missed her most in the small moments, not the big ones. The way she hummed while folding laundry, the way she always left one light on for him, even when he came home late. He missed the sound of her slippers on the kitchen floor. He missed the particular way she said his name, soft, like it was the easiest word in the world to say. After Linda died, the house grew quiet in a way Robert had never known. He stopped fixing the things that broke. The chain on the porch swing began to bend on one side, just slightly, so the swing tilted now when the wind moved it. He stopped sitting on it as often. Sometimes weeks passed, and it did not move at all. Dust gathered on the small table where the lemonade glass used to sit. He did not wipe it away. His daughter Karen called every Sunday. "How are you doing, Dad?" she would ask. "I'm fine," Robert always said. Fast, before she could ask another question. He did not tell her he ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter now, instead of at the table. He could not sit at that table. Linda's chair was still there, pushed in, exactly the way she had left it. Some nights he stood at the counter with his plate, looking at that empty chair from across the room, and he ate quickly, so he would not have to look at it for long. He stopped answering the door as much too. Mark still waved every morning, but Robert's waves grew smaller until some mornings he did not go outside at all. He watched Mark through the window instead, standing back from the glass so he would not be seen. He told himself it was nothing, just tiredness, just an old man who did not feel like talking. But some mornings, watching Mark walk back inside with his newspaper, Robert felt something close to loneliness settle over him like a heavy coat, and he did not know how to take it off. Some evenings, before the fall, Robert would stand in the kitchen and hold a plate of food he had no real hunger for. He would look at the empty chair across the table, and he would think about sitting down, and then he would not. He would eat standing at the counter instead, quickly, staring at nothing, and afterward he would wash the single plate and set it in the rack to dry, alone. There were other small signs, too, that Karen did not know about. The garden gate that Robert no longer bothered to latch, the porch light bulb that had burned out weeks earlier, which he never replaced, so that half the yard sat in shadow every night. A stack of unopened mail that grew slowly on the hallway table, mostly cards from old friends checking in, cards Robert meant to answer, and somehow never did. One night in late November, the cold came in fast, the kind that gets into old bones. Robert walked out to check the mailbox, even though it was already dark. His foot caught on the last porch step. He fell, hard, onto the cold concrete, and for a moment he could not move at all. He lay there a long time. The porch light flickered above him, on and off, on and off. He tried to call out, but his voice came out small, smaller than he meant it to be. No cars passed. No one walked by. The night grew colder around him, and Robert began to shake. He stared up at the dark branches of the old oak tree above him, the one Linda had planted so many years before, and for a strange moment he thought of her standing there, small trowel in hand, patting the soil down around its roots. He tried once more to call out, but the cold had already reached his chest, and the sound barely left his mouth. He thought, in a distant way, that this might be how it ended. Alone, on the cold ground, under a tree his wife had planted with her own 2 hands. He was not afraid. Exactly. He was only very, very tired. It was Mark who noticed. The flickering light. No shadow crossing behind the curtains. Not once. In almost an hour. Mark had been reading in his chair by the window, and something about the stillness next door had caught at the edge of his mind. He set his book down. He looked out the window one more time. Then he put on his jacket. He walked across the yard in the dark, calling Robert's name. He found him there, on the cold ground, and he did not wait. He called for help right away. He stayed beside Robert the whole time, talking to him softly, telling him to hold on, just hold on. He took off his own jacket and laid it over Robert's chest, and he held Robert's hand until the sound of a siren finally cut through the cold night air. The ambulance ride passed in pieces, bright lights. A steady voice asking him questions he could barely answer. The cold, slowly leaving his hands as a blanket, was tucked around him. Robert kept thinking, strangely, of the porch swing, and whether anyone would remember to bring the coffee cup in from the railing before the frost came. At the hospital, they said Robert was lucky. A broken hip, nothing worse. He would need surgery and then time, a long time, to heal. That first night, he lay in a pale, quiet room and stared at the ceiling. No visitors came. Karen was flying in the next morning, but that first night there was no one. A nurse checked on him once, adjusted his blanket, and turned off the overhead light, leaving only a small lamp glowing near the door. He thought about the porch swing, tilted, broken, sitting empty in the cold dark. He thought about how long it had been since anyone had truly noticed him, not just seen him, noticed him. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he let himself cry, quietly. So the nurse in the hallway would not hear. He cried for Linda. He cried for the porch swing. He cried, though he did not fully understand why, for the sound of his own front door, closing behind him each night with no one waiting on the other side. Robert came home 2 weeks later. Karen stayed a few days, then flew back to her own life 400 miles away. The house felt even quieter after she left. Robert moved slowly now, with a cane, careful on the steps he had fallen from. He avoided looking at that spot on the porch for a while. He would walk around it, just slightly, as if the concrete itself remembered what had happened there. One afternoon, there was a small package in his mailbox. Not a bill, not nothing. A plain white envelope, his name written on the front in handwriting he did not know at first. He opened it slowly. His hands were still stiff from the cold and from weeks of sitting still. He held the envelope for a moment before opening it, the way a person holds something they are not sure they are ready for. Inside was an old birthday card. The paper was soft at the corners. Worn. Robert opened it, and his breath caught in his chest. A card he had given Linda, years ago, for her 40th birthday. He remembered writing the words inside himself. He remembered standing at the drugstore for 20 minutes, trying to find just the right one. He remembered how Linda had laughed when she read it, and how she had kept it on her dresser for months afterward. He had thought it was lost forever. It must have blown out of a box years back, during some windy afternoon in the garage. He never even noticed it was gone. A small note was folded inside. Same handwriting as the envelope. Robert, I found this in my yard years ago, caught against my fence. I did not know whose it was at first. Then I saw Linda's name inside, and I knew it belonged to you. I kept it safe. I think you should have it back now. Mark. Robert sat down slowly on the porch swing, the card still in his hands. He read the note again, then a third time. He thought about all the mornings Mark had waved, all the years Mark had lived quietly next door, saying nothing, asking nothing, simply keeping this small thing safe until the right time came. He wondered how many other small kindnesses had passed by him over the years, unnoticed, the way a person misses a quiet knock at the door. He thought about the night he fell, Mark noticing the flickering light, Mark running through the dark, Mark staying beside him, not leaving. Robert had barely known his name, and still, Mark had been there, again and again, in ways Robert had never once truly seen. He almost laughed, quietly, at how long he had watched Mark through a window instead of simply opening the door. He looked up. Mark's porch light was on, just across the yard. Robert sat there a long moment, the old card resting in his hands, and something inside him began, slowly, to shift. He did not cry this time. He simply sat very still, and the stillness, for once, did not feel so heavy. It felt, instead, like the quiet just before something good is about to happen. He almost stood up right then to walk over, but his legs were tired, and the cane was heavy in his hand, and for a moment, old habits pulled him back toward the door, back toward the quiet house, back toward the easier thing. He sat with that pull for a while. Then, slowly, he pushed himself up anyway. The next morning, Robert waited by his gate. When Mark came out for his newspaper, Robert did not just wave. He walked, slowly, carefully with his cane, all the way across the yard. Mark stopped and watched him come, surprised, his newspaper still tucked under one arm. "Thank you," Robert said, "for the card." His voice shook a little. "And for that night. I don't think I ever thanked you properly." Mark shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. That's just what neighbors do." But Robert knew it was more than that. Not every neighbor keeps a small card safe for years, waiting. Not every neighbor notices one flickering porch light in the dark. Robert asked if Mark would like to come by that evening for coffee. Mark said yes, and something in his voice sounded almost relieved, as though he had been waiting 6 years to be asked. That evening, Robert took out his old toolbox. His hands were not as steady as they used to be, but he worked slowly on the bent chain of the porch swing. It took him almost an hour. He tested the chain twice before trusting it. When Mark arrived, the swing was straight again. It moved gently in the evening air, without a single creak. They sat together, 2 cups of coffee between them. At first, neither man said much. The silence did not need filling. A breeze moved through the old oak tree above them. Somewhere down the street, the same dog barked once, then stopped. After a while, Robert began to talk about Linda, the lemonade, the yellow dress, the paper lanterns on her last birthday, right there on that porch. Mark listened. He did not interrupt. He only nodded, slowly, every so often, the way a person nods when they understand something without needing it explained. One morning, Mark left a small bundle of mail on Robert's porch step, mail that had been mistakenly delivered to his own address for years without either of them noticing. Among it was an old letter Linda had once written to a cousin, never sent, tucked inside a returned envelope from long ago. Robert read it slowly on the swing, his eyes filling more than once, grateful in a quiet way that some things, even lost ones, found their way home eventually. A few days later, Mark brought over a small pot of soup his sister had made, more than he could eat alone. They shared it at Robert's kitchen table, the same table Robert had avoided for 2 years. It felt strange at first, sitting across from someone at that table again, but it also felt, in some small way, like coming home. Robert found himself telling small stories between bites, stories he had not told out loud in a long time, and Mark laughed at the right places and asked questions at the right places too. One Saturday, Mark invited Robert over to his own house for the first time. Robert was surprised at how much it felt like stepping into a stranger's life and, at the same time, not a stranger's life at all. Mark's kitchen smelled of coffee and cut wood. On the wall hung a photograph of a woman Robert did not recognize. "My wife," Mark said quietly, before Robert could ask. "She passed 6 years ago, around the time you moved in, actually." Robert had not known that. 6 years of quiet mornings and small waves, and he had never once known they shared the exact same kind of loss. They talked for a long while that afternoon, two old men who had lived side by side in silence for far too long. Robert found himself telling Mark things he had never told Karen, small private griefs he had carried alone. Mark listened the way Linda used to listen, without rushing to fix anything, simply staying present in the room. Another evening, Mark helped Robert plant a new flower by the porch steps, right where Robert had fallen that cold night. They knelt there together, hands in the dirt, saying very little. Mark held the small plant steady, while Robert packed the soil around its roots, the same way Linda once had. When they finished, Robert looked at the small green plant and felt something close to peace. He rested his hand on the dirt for a moment longer than he needed to. Robert began fixing other small things around the house, too. The gate hinge that had squeaked for years, the porch light bulb that had burned out, the loose board on the second step. Each small repair felt like a small door opening back into the world he had shut himself away from. He did not rush any of it. He took his time with each one, the way a person takes time with something they have decided, finally, is worth the effort. The porch swing moved most evenings now. Sometimes Karen called and heard laughter in the background. A second voice she did not know. "Who's that, Dad?" she asked one Sunday. "That's Mark," Robert said. "My neighbor. My friend." He said the word friend slowly, like he was still getting used to how it felt in his mouth. Karen was quiet on the other end of the line for a moment. Then she said she was glad. She sounded like she meant it. Some evenings, Robert and Mark did not talk much at all. They simply sat, coffee in hand, watching the sky change color above the fence line. Robert found he no longer minded the quiet the way he once had. It was a different kind of quiet now, not empty, just still. It was evening again. The sky was turning orange, the way it always did before the dark came. Robert sat on the porch swing. Beside him, Mark, a cup of coffee warm in his hands. The chain no longer creaked. It moved smooth and quiet, back and forth, back and forth. Robert looked at the small flower growing by the steps. Still young, still small, but growing, he thought, not for the first time, that some things simply needed a little more time and a little more attention than he had once been willing to give. Maybe someone near you has been quietly showing up all along. You do not need a big moment to notice them. Today is a good day to say thank you. The swing moved gently. Neither man said a word.